I'll kick off. My name's Natalie Lieven. I'm a High Court judge and I'm chairing this evening's Inns of Court Alliance for Women session on negotiating parenting and caring responsibilities at the bar. Thank you all very much for joining. Can I just say at the outset, I know that this time won't suit everybody, and I know no time probably suits anybody in this space. So this session will be recorded. If you know anybody who would be interested but couldn't make it, or you have to drop out part of the way through, absolutely fine. It's recorded. It'll be on our website. It'll be on YouTube, apparently, as well as on the web. So don't worry if you have to miss some of it. We've got 5 fantastic speakers. What I'm going to do is just introduce them very briefly and then go through them. We hand over to them. We're going to kick off with Emma Louise Fenelon, who's Emma Louise, give us a wave. Emma Louise is a barrister, practices in the field of civil law and inquests. And she's going to talk mainly about the kind of early stages, I think. And then following her, early stages of having children. And then following her is Emma Price, who's a bit more senior, has a public law practice with inquests and inquiries. And Emma Price and Emma Louise Fenelon have written a great book, which is coming out very shortly, about precisely this topic. So we'll put a reference to it on the web, and it's full of really practical advice based on not just their experience, but many, many interviewees. Then we will move to Sean Jones, who is the representative of the other half of the parenting on this panel. Sean is an employment lawyer primarily at 11 KBW. And then we will move to Lady Justice Whipple, Philippa Whipple, who is a member of the Court of Appeal, leads on diversity in the judiciary, and has a huge amount of knowledge and wisdom in this space. And then finally, we'll have District Judge Mariah Fagborun Bennett, who is going to talk a bit about her experience, but also cover things that perhaps other people haven't touched on. This is a really important issue because I know that there is a very high dropout rate of women who have babies, young children at the bar. But I want to start on a really positive note, which is that actually combining parenthood and the bar can work really well if you make it work for you, because the bar has a flexibility that an employed job doesn't have. So this is all about helping you to get the best out of the bar. And we're aiming for the speakers talking for about 10 minutes each, about 50 minutes, and then we're going to have a Q&A session at the end. Please contribute to the Q&A. There's a Q&A bar if you want to put questions in. There's a chat bar for general conversation. These sessions work much better if people do ask questions and we can respond to your concerns and your thoughts. So be thinking about that all the way through, please. So if I can hand over to Emma Louise.
Great. Thank you, Natalie. And first I should start by saying thank you to the Inns of Court Alliance for Women for organising this event. I think it's really important that there is such an excellent range of experiences on the panel, not least our male participant, because I think getting men involved is a really important part of this discussion. And the sort of short summary of where I am is I was called to the bar in 2015. I practice at 1 Crown Office Row, and I have a 2-year-old son. So that I'm at a very early stage of all of this. And when I discovered in 2023 that I was pregnant, I remember having dozens and dozens of questions about how this would affect my working life. And for the first time, I really felt as though this profession that I had worked very hard to break into and sort of establish myself within was precarious. And that was quite an uncomfortable feeling at a time when for the most part, I didn't really want to tell anyone I was pregnant. And so there were a few people I could go to and ask without sort of revealing my circumstances. And so I did what I always do when I'm faced with something I know almost nothing about. I consulted the internet, and I was surprised to learn that there was, at that point, almost no information that I found helpful. And when I put in variations of barrister motherhood, really the only response that was chucked back at me was examples of women I could instruct in case of, for example, labour going wrong. So that wasn't really what I was looking for. And so that lack of information was one of my primary impressions of pregnancy. And I do remember coming across a Guardian article from 2011, and it had really quite stark advice in it, and impressions that once you have a baby, there's plenty of other people coming up ready to take your work over. And when you do go back, solicitors don't remember who you are. And you have to reestablish yourself and pretend as though you don't have any restrictions on your time. And I found it all kind of bleak. And the one shining light that was a variation on that theme was the article written by Emma Price in March 2022. And that was really a rare example of someone being candid about the challenges, but also the positives involved in parenting at the bar. And so that led me, while kind of pushing my very young son around our park, to coming up with the idea of a book. And so I pitched the idea to Emma as the only other person I really knew who had spoken publicly about this. And we set about coming up with a way of trying to canvas, it really isn't just about our experience, but the experiences of a much wider cohort of people who have been through this, in particular women, but not just women. And so in the end, I am sort of happy to say that in spring next year, Bloomsbury Professional will be publishing this book, which draws together the experiences of over 250 barristers across all areas of practice, at all levels of call, men and women. And so I think one of the things that Natalie asked us in preparation for this talk was to think about 3 tips that we would offer. And my first tip isn't really a tip, but it's an observation. And that is, don't be disheartened if you find yourself with dozens of unanswered questions, as I did. There isn't a massive amount of information out there. There are lots of events like this happening more frequently, which is brilliant. But often when you're sort of 11 weeks pregnant and throwing up into a bin, the thought of turning on Teams at 6 p.m. on Monday is the very last thing that you will be physically capable of doing. So don't be disheartened, but and also things are improving. And for example, Council Magazine are now running regular family specials. That wasn't something that was happening as often. The Inns of Court Alliance Women are doing really fantastic work. Inner Temple has just recently started a podcast on movers and returners. So there's more information coming, but equally don't worry if you find yourself in the position that I did, because I think it's pretty normal. And as I discovered when I read lots of the responses we received, it is the experience of many, many others. The second thing I'd say about my experience, and I've been asked to specifically talk about the early stages, is I think there is an element of physical bravado sometimes, both attached to motherhood, but also attached to the way that we conduct ourselves at the bar. We put on a game face and we never let anyone know that, in fact, we had been on the bathroom floor with a UTI that morning at 4 a.m. when we're in court. So I think that is very much the experience and the culture at the bar, which can be quite tough when you find yourself feeling physically weaker than you might normally be. And not everyone struggles during pregnancy. Of course, I acknowledge that. There are some people who aren't particularly impacted. But if that is not your experience, know that there are many others who have been there. And some of the stories that were shared with us very candidly describe people sort of sleeping under their desks at lunchtime in chambers, cross-examining someone in a remote hearing and, briefly asking to take a pause so that they could go and vomit and then restart their cross-examination, vomiting into bins, people being too wide to actually sit in the court seats that were provided for at court, trying to carry enormous suitcases upstairs with inoperable, in courts with inoperable lifts, with severe pelvic girdle pain. And so I'm not suggesting that anything I can say is going to make that easier. If the only thing I can say is that it's so important to have honest communication with your clerks as early as you feel comfortable with about your circumstances, so that they can make adjustments, and you can expect them to make adjustments for any difficulties that you find yourself in. But equally, I acknowledge that for lots of people, they will want to maximize their earnings before they go on unpaid maternity leave. And so there's a real balance there for lots of people. One of the things that we found in our research is that some chambers are really nailing this. About 20% of chambers, 20% of the respondents described overwhelmingly positive experiences of pregnancy, maternity leave, and return to work. That experience is not equally shared at the bar. It's very unevenly spread. And so if you are at a chambers that does not feel supportive, reach out to more senior people if possible, and try and make sure that your voice is heard when it comes to those physical challenges, because they're significant for many people. And I think it's important that you don't feel that just because in many ways we do put on a game face, that you have to struggle through those early stages in silence. And then my final sort of tip and part of my experience was that I think Emma Price will say something similar, but we were lucky because we both found ourselves when we had discovered we were pregnant and were having children, that we are in supportive chambers. We have role models to look up to. There are lots and lots of, not least one of our participants today, female members who have taken silk alongside being primary carers and gone on to greater heights. And that's very encouraging, but not everyone is in that situation. And one of the things that I thought was particularly heartening, after a very bruising day in court, I went home and read every single answer in response to the question of what did you find most helpful about parenting at the bar. This was, I should say, after I'd been up kind of almost all night with a sick baby. And what was really heartening was that 1 in 4 people responded by saying that it was other barristers that got them through. So lots of people said lovely things about their spouses, and an almost equal number of people said lovely things about their clerks. But I maybe hadn't expected how much collegiate support there is at the bar and how important that is. And I think I had absorbed the idea, the sort of dangerous idea, that all I really needed to do to overcome the barriers of parenting at the bar was just to become more organised and to get up earlier. But actually, you need to build your professional village. And so that's my third tip. I think it's really important that you reach out to other people in your chambers if possible. If not, there are mentor schemes. There are the Female Advocates breakfast networks. ICAW does all sorts of events. And turn up to those, and it might be embarrassing, but ask people about their experiences and try and build that network of people that you can turn to when things get tough, because they will. I think that's guaranteed. It's it's how you respond to that really matters. So that's a little bit of my experience, and those are my 3 tips.
Thank you so much, Emma Louise. I think that was really helpful, because it's really good to hear your own experience, but also that point about reaching out and getting support is so important. And I think it works both ways. There's a duty on all of us, more senior women, to also support more junior women who are going through this. It's got to be a supportive community. So thank you so much for that. Right, over to you, Emma Price, with how it all gets so easy once they're adolescents.
Well, I may be starting a little earlier in the story than that. But I'd like to start by echoing Emma's thanks to ICAW for inviting us onto this panel. It's a real privilege to share the online stage with my fellow and our chair tonight. My story is a little further along than Emma's. So I have a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old. In fact, I was at the 4-year-old's reception nativity performance this afternoon. And one of the lovely things about them both being at school now and being at the same school is that his big brother was also at the performance. They've got this very sweet thing where they bring in siblings. And I think the thing that made me most proud today was the confidence with which my little son bellowed his line to the back of the hall. And it wasn't at all subtle, but he certainly has no problem projecting his voice. So that was a really lovely afternoon for me. In the time I have to speak to you, I want to pick up in a way where Emma left off and start with the things to think about when you are first returning to practice after becoming a parent. I also want to touch on some of the longer term challenges which are inherent in combining barristering and parenting, and just touch on as well the way those challenges evolve as children grow. I was 10 years cool when I took parental leave for the first time, 13 years cool when I took it for the second time. And in some ways, those returns to practice feel like a long time ago. And yet writing the book with Emma and casting my mind back to my own experiences, immersing myself in the return to practice experiences of so many others who've gone through it, that research and that thought process has put me right back there. There's this really human tendency to block out the really challenging times with babies and young children. And the obvious examples are the sort of early weeks when babies don't know day from night, the nights desperately trying to get a colicky baby to stop crying, the sleep deprived haze which we stumble around in. And I have to delve into the depths of my memory to get an unvarnished picture of these times. My husband was pretty hands-on and he has next to no memory of the realities of this. And I think there's something about it that is a survival instinct. The same is true, I think, about the inevitably challenging initial weeks and months to returning to. There is this feeling of, phew, I got through that, I can move on. And incidentally, the same applies to the challenges, the next stage of those challenges as kids get older, because many of the challenges do persist for after that initial return period. I think it's part of the explanation for why historically there's been really limited open and honest debate about the challenges, because even people who've been through this at the bar do not always remember the reality of it. So it may also explain why I made some of the same mistakes second time round returning to practice as I did the first. Being fully re-immersed in the reality several weeks after sending the manuscript of the book to the publishers, which is very exciting for us, there are a few things which I think you should know upfront so they don't come as a surprise to you. Number one, what you can achieve at work in a given week in the early weeks and months of your return will be dramatically different to what you could achieve before you became a parent. I can't stress this enough. I have absolutely seared into my memory the Friday night I spent intermittently breastfeeding my son back to sleep and drafting submissions, which were due to be with my leader on the Saturday morning. I was in that position because I'd enthusiastically said yes to everything I was offered when I came back, and I was hopelessly behind. I sent the draft off at 3 a.m, I went to bed and I wept. And setting aside the fact that I should have been honest about how overwhelmed I was when I found myself in that situation, honest with my leader, which I wasn't, I had massively overestimated what I could manage. The fact is that you'll likely still be suffering from some degree of sleep deprivation. If you gave birth, your hormones will still be all over the place. Baby brain, I'm afraid, persists for some time after pregnancy. And add to that the fact that you now have a cap on your work day, which is dictated by your childcare arrangements. and weekend working is not an option in the same way it used to be. So my advice, my top tip on this point, work out what you think you can achieve in any given week and half it. Number 2, small children who start nursery will suddenly be exposed to every bug under the sun. By extension, so will you. This means there will be lost time when your child cannot go to nursery, or they are ejected from nursery with no warning, and most parents have been here, and they need to be picked up. So if their temperature goes up beyond a certain amount, or if they are sick, they will need to leave nursery pretty much straight away. Even if you are blessed enough to have a nanny, your nanny may get ill and leave you without childcare when they call in sick. This unfortunately compounds the shrinkage of time and the difficulty of adjusting back to using your brain again. So unexpected lost time is inevitable, but there is a way of mitigating this. If you don't have family help nearby, make sure that you develop your childcare village, and Emma's already spoken about the professional village, who can help. So the sooner you find dependable babysitters, preferably students with free daytime hours who are willing to help out, the better. Hopefully you'll also have friends and other people who can support, but you absolutely need, I'm afraid, to have backup plans for your backup plan, contingency upon contingency for childcare. And it's really, really important that you think about that early. Number 3, trust and good communication between you and your clerks or practice managers is essential. I'm really conscious, and so is Emma, after our research, that there are still some unsupportive clerks and practice managers out there. Some 20% of the circa 250 people who responded to our survey reported coming up against actively unhelpful and unsupportive behaviour from their clerks or practice managers. But then there's the 20% who reported the exact opposite and said they would not still be at the bar if it weren't for their clerks or practice managers. Assuming you don't have willfully unhelpful and unsupported clerks or practice managers, there is something really important to remember. Your clerks and practice managers cannot help you to develop the working patterns which work for you and your family unless they know what that looks like. So you need to work out what any new limits on your practice are, even if they're only temporary. How far can you travel? Do you need to be doing more paperwork rather than court work? How many days do you want to work? What's the cut-off time for your day to enable you to relieve your childcare provider? And even if you have a partner at home looking after your child, do you want to be back for bath and bedtime? What cut-off to your day does that mean for you? You then need to trust your clerks or practice managers and communicate your goals and boundaries to them, preferably by setting rules that are really clear. And then you need to make sure that everyone sticks to them, including you. And I was guilty of this. It wasn't that anyone was forcing me to change my rules. I changed them myself and found myself really unhappy as a result. So you do have to be firm with yourself, I think, as well. Just as important is the need to review how things are going. So what's working, what's not, what's changed, have your limits changed? I think the final thing to say about this stage, so return from parental leave or return to practice after becoming a parent, is that it's really common to have a wobble in the early weeks and months. There are a huge number of people who have phoned me saying, I don't know what I've done. This is really difficult. I don't know whether this is going to work. And the thing to remember is that if it happens to you, and I promise you this is right, the fact that it feels really hard is not a reflection on your ability as a parent or as a barrister. it just is really hard adjusting to this new dual role. And realizing that you're not the only one that feels that way is really important. So the wobble is normal. And I promise you others have been there where you are wobbling at the moment. Turning briefly, if I've got enough time, to the longer term challenges, there's a brilliant quote from a senior clerk who contributed to the book, which was that everyone needs to understand there is no switch which gets flicked after a year or 18 months and everyone goes back to the pre-parenthood normal. The reality is that the challenges do go on in one shape or form for many years beyond that point. And I don't say that to be pessimistic or to in any way worry you about that, but it really would have helped me to think a bit more longer term about it. And I think a lot of people do that survival thing of coming back without really realizing that it's changed forever, you know, to an extent, you know, in a way that you can't really appreciate. And so the challenges, some of them will remain. So the childcare emergencies will remain for, you know, years to come. The issues that, you know, you face with the shrinkage of time will be there on a more longer term basis. I think the reason it's important to think about that is because whatever plan and strategy you've got, whatever working pattern you develop, it needs to be one that's sustainable, not just in the short term, but longer term. Because it's really important not to end up burnt out because you think you can manage this for a year or 2 years. The reality is that that shrinkage of time, particularly if you want to be an involved parent, does mean that the time to do work in has radically changed. So I think understanding that and looking longer term can be quite helpful. One of the things that I was not expecting when my older son started preschool nursery, so the year before reception, was how that would change things and how the demands would change. So at this point, I had a 5.5-month-old baby, and I was starting to go back to work after time off with that baby. And all of a sudden, I was being required to make Play-Doh, bake cakes for bake sales, be there at hours of the day when in theory I should be working on a very regular basis. And you absolutely want to be there. But this third space, as I call it, in which I now exist, it's not home life, it's not work, it's school life. And those demands carry on for a while, and it's something to adjust to. But I think it's also something that we should talk a bit more about, because going back to that flicking the switch, the debate about coming back from parental leave is much more common now. It's far less common for people to admit that they're finding things difficult, juggling their school age kids and work. And so, you know, it's just something that I think we all need to think a bit more about, have more of a conversation about, and to ask ourselves what that means for the way we look at the modern bar.
Thank you so much, Emma. I have to say that brings back some of the early challenges of having small babies at the bar and trying to do costumes when actually you're trying to write a skeleton argument. So it all rings incredibly true. Thank you very much. Over to you, Sean.
Thank you. So you'll have noticed I'm a man. I may, I think, be the only man here, which, if that's correct, I'm maybe able to be a bit more honest about men than I might otherwise have been able to be. Starting with picking up a point that Natalie raised, where she said that it's the duty of senior women to be supportive, but it's the duty of senior men to be supportive as well. It's the duty of heads of chambers, it's the duty of your clerks, it's the duty of the small d of your colleagues and your friends. And you'll be surprised, I think, how willing they are to help. But what very often it seems to me is a problem is, like men and like husbands, you may well have found that unless you specifically ask them for something, very often it doesn't happen. You know, they have a power to become invisible right at the moment that you need them most, unless you're very clear about what you need. So can I start by simply endorsing what Emma Louise said right at the outset, which is you have to speak up. And it might feel embarrassing, it shouldn't do, and I'll explain why in a moment, but you really need to make it clear what your needs are. And I think I'm not only a man, I'm an old man. So I've seen the way in which chambers approach the question of members of chambers taking parental leave, having families transform over the course of the last 34 years that I've been at the bar. It's not anywhere close to being perfect. It's a lot better than it was. And you should not, through silence, avoid obtaining the help that might very well be available to you. The other way in which I'm different, or one of the other ways in which I'm different, is we adopted. So I don't have any pregnancy related stories, and even if I did, my wife would kill me if I told them. But we had slightly different challenges. One of which is that our children had a really, really rough start. So we adopted our children at 4 and 2, and by that point we were the 4th family group that they had lived in. So they had their birth parents, 2 sets of foster parents. They had had 2 no notice removals, one from their birth parents, one from the first set of foster parents. And they were tremendously, as you can imagine, insecure. So this sort of thing took me by surprise. What I appreciate now in retrospect is I hadn't really appreciated the courage it took from them to get into the car and come home with us. So I had thought about, this is a brave decision that my wife and I are making. And we had had time, because it's all done, with training in advance, and you know what day it's going to happen. And there are opportunities to meet your child in advance of being their parents, all very different to the more ordinary experience. But despite all that, it somehow hadn't occurred to me that what was required of them in terms of courage was 100 times more than we were providing. I tell one story just to illustrate the problem. My eldest was 4.5 when she arrived. I called her my number 1 girl. She refused to be called my number 1 girl because she was 4 and she thought that was insulting. So I called her my number 4 girl until the night before her 5th birthday. And I sat down next to her and said, tomorrow you're not going to be my number 4 girl anymore. And she said, why not? And I said, because you're going to be 5. You're going to be my number 5 girl. And she thought about it for a bit and she said, but can I stay? So this was a year after she'd come to live with us, somewhere between 7 months to a year. And even then, she just wasn't sure we were there for her, that we were a permanent solution. So we had very particular challenges which arose from that, which you won't all face. But the difficulties that I encountered, the things which where I have failed as a parent, they might sound familiar. So rather than focusing on practical tips, and I promise you I will have one, I'm going to focus on the things which made me worse as a parent. And they were all rather uncomfortably the things that I thought were characteristics of the barrister, and the barrister approach to life. The first is massive imposter syndrome. So you're probably, if you're at the bar at all, you have experienced that all of your colleagues are extraordinarily confident people who all project the most extraordinary competence. And that extends to how they describe what's happening with their families as well. Unless there's an event like this, where, hallelujah, people are genuinely being honest about what the experience is like. So their children have always got, 8 9s at GCSE, and they're doing very well at school, and they can play a flute whilst riding a horse. And you're thinking, I can't even get enough underwear available for my children in time at the start of a day. I'm a terrible failure. So that feeling that you very often have in practice generally applies just as much to parenting at the bar, and it's just as unreliable. They're all experiencing the same things. Their children's nappies smell every bit as bad as you do. The crush of time that they're experiencing is just the same as the crush of time that you have. What my wife experienced is there's a kind of flip side to that, which was that she felt kind of inadequate alongside people who appeared to be coping effortlessly with being at the bar and being parents. But then when she went to the school gate, she went there for judgment. So there would be people who didn't have jobs who would be looking at her as the bad mum who had decided to prioritise a career over her children. And that wasn't any more true either. So what you will find is there are a lot of standards applied often unfairly to you, but even if they're not, there's a tendency to internalise them, to generate them from within and apply them completely unfairly to judging your own performance, as it were, as a parent. So that's the first, I think, self-defeating difficulty I encountered. The second is, like many barristers, probably not you, but certainly true of me and a lot of my colleagues, I had something of a saviour complex. So the way in which the job works is I get dropped, as you know, into other people's lives, and they have problems. There are moments of crisis. I solve all that for them. And then boom, I move on and I go into someone else's life and I start meddling with their existence as well. And what you get is a kind of series of issues which are presented for you, which require decision and action, and you get very good at doing that. Children aren't your clients. So I really had to readjust my approach to things. When children came to me with difficulties, I'd say, here is a solution. This is what you do next. I'd have an instant decision for them. And of course, that wasn't what they needed at all. So I really needed to work on recognizing that my barrister identity does not simply seamlessly transfer across to the parental identity. You are going to be living in two different worlds, and you have to be good at both of them, but one of them is a lot easier. If you relax around your children and treat them less as a series of problems to be resolved within a tight timetable set by your career, frankly, the easier you will find it. It made a big difference to me when I learned that lesson. And it took me about 4 or 5 years to learn it. The next barrister characteristic I had to overcome is if you're at the bar, the chances are you've done very well at exams. And if you've done very well at exams, that means that you were one of those awful children who deferred gratification. So rather than going out and playing football, you stayed at home and did your homework. You worked very hard for your exams. And then when it came to the university, you worked very hard at university and you got your degree. And we are absolutely Olympic standard deferrers of gratification. Children are not. So one very clear example of where this happens is my wife and I both have a concept we call, disgracefully, the barrister holiday. So going on a holiday, we have a laptop with us, and there's just a small hearing that needs to be done on the Thursday, and there's an opinion that I just have to turn around, or a judgment I haven't quite finished writing, and I'm sure I can knock that off in the first few hours of the first day of the holiday, but in fact it gets finished in the last few hours on the last day of the holiday, and my children stare at me until I combust with guilt. And the fact is, I have cheated my children in that respect. I had absolutely no doubt. They're now 18 and 21, and they are very clearly able to tell me. If I could give you one sort of practical tip arising out of that, protect your holidays with a stick. Really do not let work bleed into it unless you have to. And I know as soon as I say the words, unless you absolutely have to, you'll probably end up applying a much lower standard than you should do. That time is really precious. It doesn't come back, and it helps prevent burnout. So please don't compromise on holidays. The last self-defeating factor is perfectionism. So again, you're all high achievers. What you'll probably hear over the course of this session more than any other word is the word balance. People will talk to you about how you balance the needs of your profession against the needs of your children and so on. But the flip side of balance is compromise. What it means is you're not going to be able to do everything. That means you might not be able to do absolutely everything you want to do professionally. Sometimes you'll need to turn work away, as I had to do when I took parental leave and I spent time at home with the children. But equally, you're not going to be able to do absolutely everything your children might want you to do. And sometimes it means you're not going to go to that year 3 musical concert because you simply can't. And after you've been to a few musical concerts, that might not seem as bad as it does in the abstract. I was personally delighted to miss the last few years of the musical concerts at primary school because they were ear-shreddingly awful. But there will be other things. There will be times when you simply cannot make that balance work in the way you dearly wish it could. And that's not your fault. It's absolutely not your fault. It's because even if you didn't have a career, you're never going to be able to do everything. And in fact, even if you didn't have children, you'd never be able to do everything that your career might throw up. There simply aren't enough hours in the day to do everything to the standard of protection that you might, the standard of perfection that you might want. So you need to get busy forgiving yourself, I think, fairly early on. Which brings me to my practical tip, which is hard earned. That is, never cross-examine your children. So if you have a non-lawyer partner, they've probably already told you very clearly that they do not appreciate being cross-examined by you in the course of an argument. With children, it's worse, not because they object to it, but because you apply a Darwinian evolutionary pressure. So our two children were absolutely jelly in our hands, two professional cross-examiners. We were able to get to who had drawn the picture on the wall with the crayon within seconds for the first couple of years. But 2 or 3 years in, they were the most accomplished liars I have ever come across. We had pushed them into an ability to see off professional cross-examination, which I hope might form the basis for a successful career for them in due course. But it certainly makes parenting an order of magnitude harder. So under no circumstances, cross-examine your kids. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Sean. Really good advice. And I would just really reiterate the bit about don't feel you have to be a perfectionist, and don't beat yourself up when things you haven't made the cake for the school panto. It doesn't matter. Your kids will forgive you. So over to you, Philippa.
Natalie, thank you very much indeed. And thank you all for inviting me to join in. It's very nice to be here. I have 3 children, but they're a bit older now. They're in their 20s. So I'm the sort of grand old lady of this crowd, I think. But I wanted just to make a couple of observations to start with from where I sit, because I probably am, I'm certainly older than everybody on screen. I suspect, judging by the comments, I'm older than many of you who are following. As young people, particularly young women, thinking about having families and having young children, you need to know how valuable you are in this profession. You need to know that we want you in here now, and we want you in here in 10 and 20 years' time, because you really are a resource for the way the profession is going to develop and grow. So please be conscious of that. Please also be conscious of the fact there are quite good things that come later in this profession. The legal profession is quite unusual in that it's sort of new doors open to you as you go on for longer. So it really is worth staying in there. If you stay in as a barrister, you'll have the great pleasure of litigating cases with that sense of experience and knowledge behind you. Some people may choose to come to be judges, and that is a fantastic door that opens at the sort of mid stage of your career. So all I really wanted just to impress on people here was, you know, it's easy to think about you in a bubble and your life and your managing, but actually you are a part of something much bigger, which is the profession as a whole. And it's really important that we see this as a profession issue, and that you feel welcomed and valued as part of that profession. I wanted just to tell you my story. It is a bit old, but just let me tell you what happened to me. That I had a difficult time coming back after number 2, which I think can be quite difficult, because number 1 you manage with all your resources, and then number 2 suddenly puts particular burden on you. And I was feeling a bit overwhelmed and thought I'd ask some questions of colleagues, particularly female colleagues, because I thought I can't be the first person who's had some difficulty here. And I pottered around, or I talked to 2 or 3 or 4 women who were a bit ahead of me, all of whom had children. And, you know, not one of them had a really sensible thing to say, apart from, I remember one of them saying, I see her still and I know her well. She said she couldn't remember anything about the first 5 years of her daughter's life. And I thought that was really dreadful. I thought that was, I mean, dreadful for her, just dreadful for all of us, that might be the anticipation. So for what it's worth, I think it's fantastic that we have these conversations. And what I did was really think about how I could manage for me. And it was a different time. We didn't have the sort of resources available or the common understandings that you've now spoken about. But I did 3 things. I did 2. I'm going to give you 3 thoughts of what I did or what I wish I'd done. I would not give people around this table advice. You can hear what I did, and if it's helpful or useful, then we can talk about it a bit later. But the 2 things that I did, first of all, was I got an absolute iron grip on my diary. And it may be now that you have more clerking assistants to help you do that. For me, that was a bit of an extra thing that I just did for myself, but I just kept it just so under the lid. And then I started to build in lots of prep time vacations every so often. So I just felt that I kept my pace, and it was the pace that I wanted. So that was the thing number one. Thing number two may not be everybody's cup of tea, but I'm going to be honest with you, it was the thing that kept me sane. I had a chat with myself and realized that I was slightly, that I was very affected by that sort of competitive culture in chambers, always knowing what everybody else was doing and wanting to man mark and keep up. And I switched that off completely for a few years and just concentrated on me and my cases and getting me through my day. I've spoken about it in other similar forums as finding some slow water, and that's what I did. That may not be your thing, and I'm not giving it, as I say, it's not that that's everybody's thing, but I do think some people need to have permission to be able to just to adjust things and just to say, this is just about me and it's about my profession and getting me through. I did that for a few years, and I can distinctly remember the moment when I didn't want the slow water anymore. I wanted to be right back in the fast stream, and it was when the kids were probably sort of 9, 10, 11-ish at that stage, and I just didn't feel quite so needed at home anymore. And so that's when I switched it up and switched the competitive thing back on. But Sean, you've spoken about some of the culture in chambers, and that for me was something that I had to combat. The thing that I wish I'd done better, and others have touched on it, was to communicate with my clerks room a bit better than I did. I think that I've learned a lot over the last years about how you manage people and situations, but I think I allowed myself to get a bit dug in, and I think it would have been much better if I'd had much more open communication with clerks room particularly, and perhaps with colleagues as well. So I think that's, giving and receiving feedback, I think, is a really important part of how we exist as modern professionals. I just wanted to touch at the end on the judicial angle, because part of what we're talking about in terms of going back to work is managing judges who aren't always super plugged into your needs as young parents or middle distance parents to want to get back home. And I suppose my headline here is, please speak up and speak out. I well recognise that's difficult to do on occasions, and you may feel some trepidation or reluctance that it'll reflect badly on you or your client, and I get all of that. But, times are changing and the culture is changing, and I think you'll find that most judges, if you do raise it in a way that is polite and thoughtful, will be very open to the approach. In terms of managing what I think is a real pinch point, which is what happens at 4:15 when the judge wants to sit late. I don't know if any of you had that experience. How to manage that? Well, I would say, speak up and say your piece. If you can't do it, you can't do it. And it is perfectly acceptable. And I've heard it in court many times now. Barristers just standing up and saying, I've got childcare commitments, I've got to get home. And that's the end of the conversation. But I would say that sometimes you might want to anticipate a little bit. If you think you're going to run into trouble during the afternoon, it looks like it might run late, let the judge know quickly. And I say that just as a matter of sort of basic human instinct, that we're all a bit better if we know what's coming. So rather than having a sort of set to at 4:10, it might be better just to let somebody know that you are going to have to get away on time today because you've got commitments. But I'm very alive to the judicial angle on this. I know that Emma in their book have some wise counsel for how judges can manage some of these issues better. And I want all of us to be involved in that conversation, because I think we probably could all do better. Thank you. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you so much, Philippa. I think that was really helpful, practical, insightful advice, which will be very useful for many of the people who are listening and are nervous about appearing in courts and quite what to do when they have young children. It's a difficult balance, and I think that was really helpful. Right, over to you, Mariah, to finish off and give us your thoughts.
Thank you. Firstly, thanks to the Inns of Court Alliance for Women for inviting me to speak about navigating early parenthood, caring for children with additional needs, and the long-term impact of parenting in a legal career. Secondly, thank you to my husband, who is a house husband and musician. Like some of you, I am the primary breadwinner. I'm grateful for his support and love throughout our now 20-year parenting journey. I'm going to share some of my story with you and some tips. Like Philippa, some of them will be things that I wished I had done a bit better, and it comes from that. So I graduated from Oxford in 2000, did a master's and converted to law, was called to the bar in 2004. I gave birth to my eldest child in November 2005. And that meant postponing the start of my pupillage at Garden Court Chambers from October 2005 for 3 months until January 2006. So I started pupillage when my eldest child was under 2 months old. I was fortunate then that I secured tenancy at Hardwick Chambers, now known as Gatehouse, shortly after I finished my 12-month pupillage, and then practiced as a property and landlord and tenant barrister until January 24. Whilst at Hardwick, I gave birth to 2 children, 9 months apart. So I had 3 children while 9 years apart, not 9 months, 9 years apart. So I had 3 children whilst at the bar. So with child number 1, I have tales of expressing breast milk in the toilets, trying to make each second with my baby count when I was home, and desperately trying to show during pupillage that I was just as capable and I deserved to be taken on as a tenant. I took slightly longer with my second child, about 5 months. And for about a year, I attended, not only the playgroups, I was in the PTA meetings, I baked lots and lots and lots of cake when my first child started school. With my third child, I went back part-time when he was, again, under 2 months old. And I did a secondment, working 2 long days, which left me with 5 days with my baby. And for me, it provided a perfect balance of income and time with him, so I could take longer off. And I got to experience Gatehouse's maternity policy. So, developing a maternity plan. And we had this thing of, you had a maternity mentor. So I have been a mentor, and I also, when I had my last child, got to be mentored. And that was great. And if you are in a chambers where they don't have things like maternity plans and mentors, then it's something that you could start doing for yourself, developing a plan. When I became pregnant with my third child, I thought my career was going well. I was getting ready to make judicial application. Some around me had concern that a baby would just derail everything. I mean, I had a boy and a girl. Why was I having a third child anyway? It didn't. I was interviewed by the Judicial Appointments Commission in 2018, a few weeks after giving birth. Now, if this happens to you, don't do what I did. Instead, ask for some adjustments. For me, it was the first time I'd left my baby. I was worried about breast milk leaking during the interview. I was, it was a difficult experience. An email exchange would probably have meant being given extra time between the exercise to pump or to feed the baby, or even rearranging for a few weeks. I was interviewed again in August 2019, and this time was successful. When I was appointed as a deputy district judge during the 2020 pandemic, it meant on sitting days, I could spend more time with my youngest child, as the judiciary needed lots of judges, so there was lots of sittings. Court finished early. I didn't have to work at the weekends. Once I was done, I was done. And I was free, so I was able to enjoy that period of time of where extra judges were necessary. I'm happy to talk during the Q&A about parenting children with chronic health conditions and children with special needs. In relation to this, I'd say communication is key. I've tried to be open, some would say with some truth that I overshare on occasions, in the hope, though, that it's accepted that when I say I can meet a deadline, despite whatever else is going on in family life, that is accepted as the truth. It can be difficult to turn up as your best self when there's a lot going on. So you need to be honest with yourself about whether you can give your best to your client, as they deserve nothing else, when life throws something unexpected at you. You are an advocate. Those skills that you use to fight for those who pay you can come in surprisingly handy when you have to advocate for your children. As some of you know, I was a facilitator on the first Bar Council leadership programme, which was a rewarding experience. And I think 3 of the women in my group ended up giving birth or getting pregnant, nothing to do with me during that process. I was a co-founder of All Rise Initiative. And I'm going to share the 4 Ds with you because I think it can come in handy with anything, including how we interact with each other with parenting. Take direct action when you're in a position to do so. Can you help in a direct way? Distract or act as a circuit breaker if you see bullying, harassment or discrimination or just bad behaviour going on. Are you in court and your opponent has said that they've got childcare difficulties and the judge has been a little bit difficult? Is there something you can do? Is there direct action you could take? Could you speak up? Could you distract? Delegate to somebody else who is better able to help. So that's the third D. Or delay immediate assistance and then go to the person later and check in with them if they're okay, if there's anything that you can do to support them. Life as a mum on the bench for me differs depending on whether I'm sitting as a civil judge or as a family judge. When I'm in civil, I get what I call the sweet spot of having a proper work-life balance and being able to spend the free time I have with my family. When I'm in family, it's a little bit more like being a barrister. You take some work home with you and the hours are longer. So I get a little bit of the two. A few more tips, if I may. You will make mistakes, and it's okay to cry when that happens. Your task will be trying to make sure that you provide care that is good enough to meet the needs of each individual child. Anything above that is just a delightful bonus. 2, you need to make sure you take care of yourself, even if it's 30 minutes per day when you're not working or trying to meet anyone else's needs. Mindfulness, exercise, but only if that genuinely makes you feel good. Meditation, reading, just lying on the sofa with your eyes closed and your do not disturb turned on. And 3, it's all about balance. You've got to get the balance right for you and your family. Work out what's important to you and to each member of your family. Each child will have different needs. For one child, it might be really important that you attend sports day. Another child might cherish 10 minutes you spend together whilst being dropped off at breakfast club. Yet another just wants you there before they close their eyes. Be there for those important moments for that child. I mean, the day I was discharged from hospital after giving birth to child number 3, I went to watch child number 2 perform in musical theatre. I still had my hospital band on. It mattered to her that I was there, and I could safely do it with a sleeping newborn. So why not? I managed to do it. On the one hand, you will not be able to be there for every event, every pickup and drop off without it having a negative impact on you and or your career. Also, it won't benefit your child. It's okay for them to cry and it's okay for them to miss you. As a psychologist friend said to me, resilience and strength is obtained from facing some adversity and getting upset. So it's part of how they learn. And it also means they know the significance when you make it to the school play or sports day or wherever it is. I love being the hero when I turn up. Mum's here. Yes, yes. On the other hand, you need to find a balance with such a demanding job. You'll feel pulled to cancel events with your child or children so you can take on a particularly juicy case or meet a deadline. And as Sean said, the unless you have to becomes quite a flexible concept, and you find that you're saying yes to all of those things. You'll take work with you on holiday, meaning that you're physically present in front of your children, but your mind is elsewhere. So you need to make sure you don't miss all the precious time with your children. You'd be better off going somewhere else, doing the work and spending 10, 15 proper minute eye-to-eye contact with your child than sort of half-heartedly trying to do your drafting or whatever else it is whilst going, yes, I'm listening, no, yes. You make the hard decisions and you learn to live with it. And it's important, I think, to be fully present when you are physically present. Otherwise, as I say, you may as well work and then come home when you're done. I want to finish by saying that being a parent is genuinely one of the most rewarding and fulfilling things, if not the most, that I've done. I remember sitting with my husband shortly after the birth of our second child and before the birth of our second child, and wondering how we could possibly love another child as much as Sean. And then Macy came along and our hearts stretched, so it was hard to remember a life before her. Then Miles came along and our hearts stretched further as we continued to navigate family life, filled with love for each other, even if, as with all families, we sometimes wind each other up. Don't let fear of not being enough hold you back. And that's it for me.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful and so true. And also brought out one of my 2 top tips, which is there is no, every family, everybody's different. Each of you are different. Each family is different. Each financial pressure is different. Each practice is different. But what I hope you get out of this session is some of these tips that work for you and your family and your situation. So don't feel there is one model. And I think what's been fabulous about these speakers is we've all said everybody said slightly different things, prioritize different things that work for them. So that's what I hope you will all take away. And my one practical top tip, which a number of other people have mentioned, is try to be as open and honest with your clerks as you can be. If they don't know what it is you want or what problems you're facing, the throwing up in the bin on the way to court, the court spinning that happened to me when I was about 12 weeks pregnant, if the clerk doesn't know, they can't help. So, and that leads to, there's a few questions in the Q&A, and I was going to start with one that follows on from that, which is some practical advice about what you do if you are in that cohort of not having a fantastically good supportive clerk. I mean, we're not talking about, reporting people. It feels like that's a very nuclear option. But has any of the panel got any ideas about how you do approach the problem if you feel you're not getting the support? I mean, my sense would be try and find somebody more senior in chambers who you can talk to and develop strategies. I mean, and who can intervene on your behalf. But any other thoughts?
I've got something to say. I mean, having had, so the bar has changed from having the 3 children, given the gaps that I had between them. And certainly what I would say is, if your chambers doesn't do something like the parenting plan, the maternity leave plan that I was talking about, that would be one way of sitting down and framing for yourself, what do you want to do before you go on leave? Who are the importance listers for you? How do you want to communicate that to them? And then whilst you're away, which cases do you want for the clerks to communicate to you about? How do you want to handle things in the first 6 weeks, in the first 6 months, and so on? And write that down, because I think that then helps with the communication. And if you've clearly got a plan in place of, this is how I want you to interact with me, and I've thought through not only before but during, but also my longer term plans. This is where I want to end up, and this, before I give birth, is how I think that I'm going to, I think I'm going to do it. I think that may help when you're facing somebody that's being difficult or not understanding, and it opens up communication.
Yeah. Natalie, can I just come in?
Yes,
I think there's quite a lot of guidance out there from Inns of Court. I know Middle Temple has a talent retention committee that's got some guidelines. I suspect the Institute of Barristers Clerks has some, I know they have some guidelines. I think you're on really solid ground if you have, I mean, I know it's more work to do, but if you've looked up what the contemporary advice is, and that's the basis with which you go to your clerks. And if you don't succeed with clerk number 1, you go to clerk number 2, clerk number 3, whoever it is. Sometimes you have to, I think, push the boundaries a bit, but you are on solid ground in what you're asking for if you want just to be looked after properly as somebody either thinking about going off on maternity leave or paternity leave or with small children. So hold your ground and use some of the resources available. I think it really helps.
Yeah, somebody's put in the chat bar, the Bar Council apparently has guidelines on this, and I would also say be prepared to be flexible, because it's a bit like those birth plans that you're encouraged to write and then never get read when you're actually going through the horror of labour. What you think, tying together Mariah's point and Emma Price's point, what you think you might be able to achieve before you go on maternity leave might feel very different once you've got a 6-month-old baby. And also babies differ. you know, as the miraculous parent or the parent of miraculous babies who slept through the night, I was laughing. But equally, if you've got kids who don't sleep through the night for, you know, more than a year, your productivity is going to take a hit. Every human being, that's going to be true of. So be prepared to be flexible and deal with the situation. Emma.
I was just going to add to that, if you're coming up against, you know, unhelpful or unsupportive clerking, the ED&I officer in chambers should be a good port of call for you. You know, they're in that role for a reason. More senior, they can often be a conduit to more senior people in chambers who can do something about a culture in a clerk's room. And sometimes very senior members of chambers won't know the reality of what's going on the ground in the clerk's room and how people are being treated and interacted with. And they can't do anything about it if they don't know about it. So one way or the other, they have to be told, and they need to be told what the impact is on a person who is being unsupported in that environment. And so I think there's a nervousness. If you fear, it's very shocking, I think, when you fear come up against unsupportive or unhelpful behaviours, and particularly when you're in a vulnerable place. So making sure that that communication is had through the most, you know, the easiest way for you, and the ED&I officer should be able to help.
Yeah. And I think it's right to acknowledge that being unsupported can take different ways. I mean, I think Philippa touched on this. You know, my clerk, when I came back from maternity leave, I think the second time, I went downstairs and it was still the days of paper diaries. And I found they booked me in a 3-month inquiry in Birmingham. And, you know, they thought they were being supportive because they thought they were helping my practice. That left very quickly. So being unsupportive, it may not be a deliberate effort. Your clerk may think they're being fantastically helpful having you in the Supreme Court the whole time, but it just might not fit your lifestyle choices. Somebody asked, let's get a bit of advice on that. When do you tell solicitors you're pregnant? I'm not sure there's a one size fits all, but any thoughts? If you're about to do a long case, you have to tell them. You know, you can't go off halfway through a case. That is not going to help you when you come back. That would be my view. But the Emmas, any thoughts? Emma Louise.
I'm happy to jump in. I think, I mean, unfortunately, there is, frustratingly, and I remember, I mean, it was not that long ago that I grappled with this question. I wanted someone to just tell me the answer. You know, this is the appropriate time is to tell them, you know, 46 days before, and this is the wording of the email you sent, and there will be no impact, and they will be, you know, happy for you, and also won't bat an eyelid at sending you your next instruction. And that's just not, it's not how it works. It very much depends, I think, on your relationship with that particular client, what they've booked you for, you know, over the next 12 months, whatever. But the only point I really want to make is that anxiety about telling solicitors was one of the most significant anxieties that all of our nearly all of our respondees spoke about, that particular interaction. And what was so nice about much of the feedback that we got was that almost all of the time that anxiety was unnecessary. You know, solicitors have babies too. Often their employment culture is more forward thinking than, you know, some people's chambers, and so they were very supportive and continued to instruct people when they did come back. So I don't think the anxiety is unusual, and if anyone feels that they are unusually worried about that, know that they are you know, one of many experiencing that particular fear. I think one of the things to remember is that when, not exclusively, but often when people get pregnant, they are more junior, particularly the first time. So just to go back to the point that was the question that was asked before this, which was about, you know, what do you do if you face a really hostile clerking culture? You can, of course, advocate for yourself. You can point out all of the Bar Council has guidance that is mandatory for chambers now, I think since 2016. But the nuclear option is also an option. And if you are in a set that is not working for you, biding your time and thinking about moving is something that, you know, ought to be on the table, because you should not be working somewhere that you are not fully supported within. And I think that's something to remember. Lots of the people who responded to us spoke about having a first baby and then deciding to move chambers because their clerking teams were not supportive, and then really thriving in their second set. And I also think we all need to raise the sort of the expectations of everyone so that chambers catch up and realize the only way that they're going to retain talent is if they improve their working cultures. So I just thought that was worth mentioning.
Yeah, I think that's all right. And I have to say the other thing is to think about how you develop your practice to meet your parenting, what you want in your parenting. So, for example, I told my clerks I didn't want to do planning inquiries outside London when my children were little. I took a bit of a financial hit, but that was a choice I made. Equally, I think if you're at the commercial bar, and American clients are famous for the fact they want you on call 24/7. And that's difficult when you've got small children. I mean, I'm not saying don't work for American clients. That would probably be frightfully discriminatory. But I did find that American solicitors firms have expectations which are difficult to match when you have young children. So it's just about thinking about how you're going to develop your career to meet what you want out of it. Any other thoughts in that one? Okay, and then the somebody asked, and I just perhaps like a bit of a view on this. How do you manage if you get pregnant during pupillage? I think, Mariah, you said that was the case with you. I mean, I can see that's quite challenging.
Yes, I mean, yes, it was. So I was due to start pupillage in October and gave birth in November. So I started pupillage with he was under 2 months old. It wasn't easy, and it was a slightly different time in 2006. I think the bar has developed somewhat since then in terms of recognitions of things that you might need and what you can ask for and expectations. But it's certainly possible in terms of the hours that you're meant to be keeping during pupillage. But I think you would probably need to have support, if not from your partner, then other family members or something else, so that you don't feel that you're missing out. Because the pull to be with your child, I mean, I think it may differ from person to person, but can be quite strong. And whilst the pull to also be successful in your chosen career is also quite strong, and trying to find a balance when your time is not really your own as a pupil. You might choose to be there early or choose to be there slightly later, but not do both in terms of trying to find a workaround. I mean, it wouldn't be sort of in my top tips of things to do, doing, but I was 26 and I survived it. I got through it, and certainly when I was in my second six, I found it was much easier, because if I finished in court early, I could go and then spend a bit of time with him and then do the paperwork or prep for the next day when he was asleep. So that flexibility that you have at the bar, which means that sometimes you can be at sports days and all these things if you're not in court, that once I was in my second six, that certainly came in. On the other hand, my Garden Court chambers would have let me have 12 months off if I hadn't insisted that I was ready to come back in January. So it's always an option to have the discussion and say, I am pregnant, can I defer my pupillage for, a longer period of time? You don't have to be Superwoman.
I think that's tying, if I can say it, Mariah's point with Philippa's. Most people who come to the bar are highly motivated, very competitive, and extremely driven. And in some, that may be great. You may be able to do all of that and have small children, but you don't have to. You can just lower that switch a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. Maybe it's like a dimmer switch. It's not an on-off. I mean, maybe you should look at it like that.
Yes.
Because I do think you need that ambition and drive actually to cut it at the bar. I think the bar throws some quite difficult days at you. So you do have to have a sense of forward momentum. But definitely, I think you can, well, I've said it, I think you can shift around your working priorities to accommodate things at home for a bit anyway.
And I think it's important we all remember that careers these days are long.
Very long.
There is one member of the Court of Appeal who, I think it's right, took at least 7, if not more years
She was off, yeah.
Completely. Went away from the bar for a long period to look after her, inter alia to look after her children, and then came back and is now a member of the Court of Appeal. So, you don't have to, we all feel a need to prove ourselves. And for some people, that's absolutely fine. And it's not there's no one right size fits all. One of the people in the chat bar has picked up, and this is obviously moving on a bit in careers, to silk applications and the need for 12 significant cases. Some people's practice, will have that, and it will be doable. I think as a brand new mother, it's always going to be a stretch. I think it's possibly one area where I would say don't feel you have to achieve everything but by the age of 35, but don't know about other people. I mean, pace yourself would be my advice.
It's a real problem, I think, for people, not just who have families, but I think lots of people feel they're in walks of professions where it's difficult to get enough assessors for silk. So there's a lot of guidance about that as well, and how you can sometimes shift that around and get different sorts of people to do it or reduce the numbers. But I guess I would actually, funny enough, Natalie, I would say if you're at that point of wanting to take silk and you really think, you're ready to put in a good application, but you just haven't quite traveled enough territory, I'd hate to say to somebody, oh, well, try it in a couple of years' time. You know when you're ready, you want to have a go at it. So do your best to find some people to fill in their assessment forms for you.
Yes, and I mean, actually, if I can argue against myself, this is a bit of an obsession of mine. I'm a judge in the family division, but I didn't practice in family. And it is a real problem in family that many women don't apply for silk because they think they're going to have to travel so much. And that's not going to be compatible with having young children. So I am very, very keen that more really good women in family do apply for silk and do get it. And I would talk to more senior women about how you can meet the criteria. Come and, have a chat with me if you're at that stage, because the family bar is very disbalanced in that particular way. So there are ways to make it work. Absolutely. Right. Okay, I think we've covered the questions. Has anybody got a question that we haven't covered? Somebody said, is there an expiration date for practicing at the bar if someone takes a very long career break? Well, I think I've said absolutely not. I mean, there are people who come to the bar in their 60s. It has to be said, often men. But I know a woman who's come to the bar in her 50s. And, you come to the bar when you're 50, you've still probably got 20 years career, which is long enough for anyone, to be frank with you. All right. Being very conscious of the time. Does anybody feel they've got a question that hasn't been answered or something they want to say? Oh, hang on. Somebody's just popped up. Right, hang on. Right. Yes. I think, Mariah, you might have mentioned raising children with special needs. I mean, any thoughts in that space?
I think all the tips that we've been given apply, equally in relation to especially in relation to communicating with clerks. It'd be easier to answer a specific question. I mean, this might be something that we pick up on another day, but I think communication is going to be key. The pull is going to be the same in terms of wanting to be there. And as I said, about using your skills and talents as an advocate in trying to navigate what can be a very difficult emotionally and otherwise process for your children. And so, but if there's a specific question, then, you know, I'm happy to either answer it now or on a future occasion.
Yeah. Sean, you wanted to say something?
Yes, so one of my daughters has special educational needs, and it's one of the, to contradict what I said earlier, it's one of the few areas in which actually being a lawyer can be very helpful, because I think most parents with a child with special needs will tell you that there is in theory support available, but actually getting it takes a willingness to get dug in to some of the most obscure and resistant bureaucracy you're ever going to encounter. And yeah, just determinedly going at it and knowing how to fill in a form and know exactly what to say to whom at the right moment is probably to your child's enormous advantage. I think it's one thing we probably are better at than many parents.
Yeah. All right. Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you so much to the speakers. I hope that's been a useful session. I hope everybody's managed to take some thoughts and helpful ideas away from it. So thank you all very, very much for sharing your thoughts and insights. And thank you so much to everybody who's attended. And as I say, please, if you found this useful and you know other people who might find it useful, please tell them about it and get them to go on the website and listen to it. All right. And finally, thank you to the organisers for having set the whole thing up so seamlessly. So I'll let you all go and bathe babies and put them to bed and read books, and I'll go and cook dinner. Thank you so much.
Thanks
Bye,
very much.
everyone.
Good night.